Hi, I'm Jeff Miller.
I'm Anthony Navarro, and welcome to Talk Out Loud, where we share the LGBTQIA+ narrative, one story at a time. On this episode of Talk Out Loud, we're here with Alysse Dalessandro Santiago. Alysse is a Midwest plus-size fashion blogger, LGBTQ influencer, writer, designer, and professional speaker based in Cleveland, Ohio. Growing up, she was inspired by her business-savvy mother and drawn to gender studies and fashion. After leaving Ohio, she made her way to the big city, all the way to Chicago, where for the first time, she met other queer people like her. On the outside, her style displayed a strong, confident woman, but underneath that was a timid personality wanting love. Then one day, while crossing a busy intersection, something happened that would forever change her life. From that moment on, she would realize that she was capable of anything. Let's hear Alysse's story.
Good afternoon, Alysse. We are so happy to have you here with us here on Talk Out Loud. How are you doing today?
I'm so great. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. You are in the Cleveland area, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I'm in Cleveland, Ohio.
Yeah. Go Buckeyes.
Not in this house, but yeah, in general. Yeah, my husband is an Alabama fan, so he was very happy on Monday. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you got to have that celebration in your home.
Yes.
Yeah. So did you grow up in Cleveland?
Yes, I grew up in the Cleveland area in a suburb in between Akron and Cleveland. And it was kind of a smaller suburb, pretty conservative. And it was definitely an interesting place to grow up. I couldn't wait to get out by the time I turned 18 for sure, but it was an interesting place to grow up.
When you say you couldn't wait to, was there somewhere that was calling you that you were like, I want to go to here, or something that kind of had captivated your eye or anything like that?
In terms of places that captivated my eye, I really wanted to go to a big city. If there's anything that I realized from growing up in a suburb, it was that I wasn't really being exposed to enough culture. I was kind of I remember first identifying like as a feminist in like the 4th grade and like really just challenging. I remember I had an English teacher who made us watch Family Guy like in school. And I was like, this is sexist. And I was just like that kid. And so, not that like I couldn't challenge the beliefs of my smaller town, but I was destined, I think, to find more like-minded people in a bigger city. So I applied to different colleges, LA, I looked in New York, Philadelphia, Boston, and I ultimately ended up in Chicago.
Chicago. That's a special place in our heart. Yeah.
Right.
Just out of curiosity, was your mother a strong role in your life growing up as far as
absolutely. Yeah, my mom is like, she has such a strong personality, coming from a 100% Italian family, the mom is really the head of the family in so many ways. And my mom was such a strong businesswoman. My dad actually recruited her to work for the company that they both worked for in the 80s. And my mom was like a top salesman, and she was one of the only females like in that job. So I grew up seeing my mom, start businesses, and she was a personal shopper at one point, which was cool. And I just always saw my mom, show me that like there was nothing that she couldn't do. And at the same time, she showed me that, and also had an amazing closet. I was constantly going in there, stealing her boots and her earrings. And now some of them, I grew up to wear the same size shoe as her. So I have some of her boots that I remember going into her closet as a kid and wearing. I have them now. So, she was everything to me I love my dad and have a great relationship with him. But in terms of modeling, being a strong woman, that was definitely my mom.
Yeah, Alysse, I totally connect with you on that. I grew up in that big Italian family, 100%, right? 100% Italian.
Yeah.
And there were strong women all around me. And I feel like from great grandma who was an entrepreneur and a businesswoman to my grandma to, mom and aunts. And it just, there's something I think that happens when you have a strong female presence in your life that influences you just a little bit differently. I feel like if I look back, there's so many times where I see today where I'm in sort of like maybe like a situation in business where I'm maybe not sure how to handle it. And I like pause and I think, how would my grandma have handled this? Or what would her thought process been?
Right.
And I think it just, and also then, having men, in my life too, just seeing like the difference in how they handle things when it comes to work and, business and everything. So definitely relate with you on that. I do have a question though.
Sure.
Thinking about you growing up in sort of a smaller town, having your mom being this entrepreneur or, businesswoman, how was that perceived by the people in your town?
I remember the first time I went to a friend's house and her mom was there when we got off the bus and she was baking cookies. And I was like, I didn't think this was a way that people actually grew up. Like, I just remember being like, this is so weird. And it's not that like me and my mom didn't bake cookies, but like her life didn't revolve around solely like taking care of me. She had a lot. That was one of the many hats that she wore. And so I remember thinking that that was so strange. And a lot of my friends, their moms didn't work and they had more like, I guess traditional households. But for me, I feel like I got really close to my older sister. I went to different summer camps. I did lots of after school activities. And my parents, I never felt like my parents weren't there because they were working. I just felt like I grew up seeing like that's what you do. Like you work hard, you play hard. And my mom did it all like, looking glamorous. And, it's funny because I went to my mom's house last night and she was showing me how to cook some different things, being at home and being quarantined. I'm like, I got to like mix it up a little bit. And so I went to my mom's house literally yesterday and she was like, you know what? If I was dead, I'd still help you. And that literally is such an Italian mom thing to say. Oh, yeah. If I was dead, I'd still be helping you. And it's true. Yep. Like, that's just how she is. So very, very giving of herself. And I never felt like she wasn't around. She was always there, but yet she was working and she was, literally planning. She worked for the American Diabetes Association, planning these like huge fundraising events. And I got to go to them and see all that. And it was just so cool. So she was such a great role model.
Yeah, that's so great.
And it's interesting knowing you today that looking at who you are as a person and just your talent with fashion and how you use that in your own life, I can only think that that there was a bit of an exposure to that from your mom that you were able to then celebrate in your own life. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think, by nature, I'm a shy person. I'm an introvert by nature, but my mom is an extreme and extrovert. And so at first, when I was growing up, like she didn't really understand like what to do with a shy child. It just didn't make sense to her. And so I think I learned a lot about like how to be more of a socialized extrovert from my mom. And I think I would have, there are still times in this job as an influencer where I'm like, I need a breath. I need to get away, because it is draining. But, there are things that I learned from her about, how to be extroverted and how to be in a, she walks into a room, networking is her favorite thing. So, quarantine is killing her. She would walk into a room and be like, and feel like energized. I walk into a room of people and I'm like, I'm a little nervous. So, I think we can learn from each other in that way for sure. But yeah, she's extremely extroverted and I'm not by nature, which usually surprises a lot of people.
Yeah. I think it's really important to identify with like those feelings because sometimes when we don't know what's wrong with us or let's say, or something doesn't feel right, so it's like, what's going on inside me? It's almost like, that owner, like, when we get a car, there's an owner's manual and there's a dashboard that tells us, right?
Yeah.
And I remember finally realizing that, because people would say to me, oh, you're so extroverted, but I'm kind of like 50-50. Right. So like if I don't get a little bit of both, like I remember when Anthony and I we had a farm in Michigan and we were living in Chicago back and forth. And I remember when I would leave to go to the farm, I felt so good. But then when I leave to come back to the city of Chicago, I felt so good too.
Right.
And now our lives have changed and we no longer have the farm. And I really have to make space for like what I would call that farm time, if for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's solitude. I totally feel that. You got to recharge, and that's part of self-care, especially, now in 2021. It's so important to be able to know like what you need and listen to your body's cues. And even though you're at home, does that mean that you're alone or that you're relaxing or that you're taking that time? No, not necessarily. So I think that's great that I like that. I'm going to use that farm time.
Well, it's all yours. And what I'd also like, the language of the heart that you used is solitude. And there's a big difference between solitude and isolation, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's another thing that I've had to realize is like, am I isolating or am I really doing self-care and doing solitude?
Right.
So yeah, we're definitely on the same page.
I love that. Maybe that's a result of, growing up in these big, loud families. To escape.
Yeah. So you leave for Chicago.
Yes. So I left at 18 to go to Loyola University Chicago. And I'm sure you all know that they have 2 campuses. So I lived in Rogers Park, which is one of the most ethnically diverse neighborhoods in all of the country. It's the second most languages spoken in any neighborhood in the whole United States. And I know all that because I was a tour guide at Loyola Chicago. So I knew all the facts and figures, and I loved my school, and I was so excited to talk about it. And I was a double major in gender studies and journalism. Gender studies was based on the Rogers Park campus. So I lived there and did half my classes there. And journalism was in the School of Communication, which is right downtown on Magnificent Mile. So I did half my classes there. And so it was really like the best of both worlds because Rogers Park has like a great kind of neighborhood feel, lots of culture. And then obviously like I remember the first time I went to class and then like went to H&M and I was like, this is so cool, like because like we had like one Gap in my town and that was like the coolest thing, like there was like, so going and being able to go to class and go shopping, like that was just not something that I ever really thought possible. It seems so silly now, but at the time it was huge. And to be able to take public transportation places and just, it really just opened my eyes to a whole different world.
Yeah, that's a big difference between, coming from a small, town to, being sort of in the city that way. And Rogers Park, like you said, I mean, that literally, if you want culture and diversity, there's no other place to go in Chicago to kind of get everything in one place.
Yeah.
I'm curious. So you said that you were a double major, journalism and gender studies.
Yes.
So they seem, I'm, as I'm sitting here, I'm kind of like putting the two together on how they could work together. How did you get to the place where you found that those were the majors that you wanted to study?
Well, I had always had an interest in gender studies. Like I said, as soon as I discovered the gender studies section at the library, which was like in the 4th grade, I was like reading all these books about gender studies. And I always knew that I was going to study that because it was something that really interested me. At the time it was called women's studies. And now they've since expanded it to be changed to gender studies. So like my senior year, they changed it to gender studies. And I was like, yes, this is what my degree gets to say. But, which is more exciting for me than just women's studies. But yeah, that was always something that interests me, but I knew that it would be not as practical of a career. So I started when I was in high school writing an opinion column for the newspaper. I was the opinions and commentary editor of the newspaper. Imagine that. And and I was always writing about feminism and gender issues. And so it kind of just made sense to do those 2 majors together because, I wrote about like a book review on the feminine mystique and what it meant in, the early 2000s and all of this stuff, So it made sense to me. I really thought like, okay, I'm going to write about, women's issues. That's what I'm going to be a journalist. That's what I'm going to do. And then fashion was just really, really pulling me. So when I was writing articles for the paper in college, I was going to Chicago Fashion Week. I was interviewing designers. I did an internship with a television reporter, and I remember the first time I helped her with an article on perfume, and she was like, okay, well, these are beauty products. We can't send them back. So do you want one? And I was like, this is the coolest job ever. Like, yes, I want YSL perfume for free, So I was really being torn in both directions. And I really just realized like, you don't have to necessarily, you can write about fashion from an informed, like gender inclusive perspective. Like you don't have to really box yourself in. And so I kind of just was like, these are the things I like to do and I'm going to study both of them. And I think having both perspectives has been really helpful in my career. So yeah, I was kind of like, I'm going to be a double major and a minor. I'm not doing anything that's just for fun. I want it all to count for something at the end of the day. So I was an studio art minor, and that's where I first learned jewelry making, which would lead eventually to what became Ready to Stare. So
that all totally makes sense. Like, and looking now, like at where you're at, like that definitely I can see how that works. So I know myself in college, I can't remember if it was under women's studies or, so I went to DePaul in Chicago, and I can't remember if it was women's studies or if the department had already been renamed to gender studies. And I took quite a few different classes as part of my electives. So no, I didn't, do it as a major or anything, but I remember like a lot of those classes were sort of the first time I had a more in-depth conversation about gender and sexuality and queer history and queer theory. Did you have any sort of like the similar experiences with some of the classes that you were taking?
Absolutely. The nice thing about the gender studies major at Loyola is that it was all interdisciplinary. So it was like women in religion and women in politics, psychology of women. But my absolute favorite class was queer theory. And I remember showing up to class, and the teacher or the professor was this queer Italian woman who looked a lot like Lady Gaga, honestly. And that was like around like the Just Dance period. So, I was like, oh my God, she looks like Lady Gaga. She's so beautiful. And she had two partners. She had a male identified partner and a female identified partner. And I remember the very first day she drew a line on the board and said, sexuality is a spectrum and it's fluid, and how you identify right now is not how you may identify in the future or in the past. And that can change. Your sexuality can change. And it's not just you're 100% gay, 100% straight, or you're 50-50. That's not how sexuality works. And my mind in that moment was like blown. I was like, that makes a lot of sense. And no one had ever explained it to me that way. So even though it was an academic class, I was really able to be like, okay, my sexuality is fluid. I never felt 100% straight, but I knew I had attraction to all genders. So I was like, I think that my sexuality is fluid. And so that was the moment where I started identifying just personally as fluid. I think outwardly, I was still so self-conscious and afraid of being judged, and didn't really know what it meant to be fluid, but I understood that I was, if that makes sense.
The epiphany that sometimes when someone gives you words to feelings that you've had,
exactly,
that is such a gift. And that's something that, sometimes you have to go out and explore, the journey of life to have those encounters.
And I remember that class was so interesting because we would have extra credit assignments. It was like, you could either go to Jackhammer or you could write a paper about Paris is Burning. And I would be like, I'm going to watch Paris is Burning and write a paper. But, I got to listen to the people who their extra credit was going to Jack. I mean, it was really interesting that that was a class at a Catholic school. I was like, this is interesting.
Yeah. And just a little backstory, because Anthony and I are like, we're being from Chicago. Jackhammer's on the north side, just north of Andersonville, which is there's a couple different queer communities in Chicago. But Jackhammer is definitely an experience. And yeah, so I'll just leave it at that. But
no, it was we read some really interesting books, and I remember being like, I can't believe I'm like reading about fisting for school. This is so weird. But I was so glad that I was exposed to that, because that is what I wanted. I wanted to understand everything about sexuality, and coming from, a Catholic Italian family, sex wasn't talked about. So I just had no idea. So I was like, I'll take that information in wherever it comes from.
Right. And you know what? I'm going to tell you something, just because we're talking about, this is a really interesting conversation, but is that I have learned that just because it doesn't do something for me, just to kind of like sit on the sidelines and listen to people talk about their different, whether it's fetishes or whatever it is, or sexual, and to be like, oh, okay, just be neutral and just to listen, to understand. And it's actually really allowed me to connect with people in different communities, specifically like the leather community, or, I'm just using that as an example where I'm like, oh, I see what's happening here. There's an exchange of brotherly love or whatever, for men, and, and there's also women as well. I'm really glad that I allowed myself to sit and get to know those people, and to understand and to see how the love is taking place in that community, if that makes any sense.
Yes. But, I think just almost normalizing that people that the way people have sex and the way people experience sexual pleasure is different. That
Yeah.
class like really normalized it for me. So that was really helpful. I think, it helped me to be more open-minded when I encountered people who did have, different sexual interests than I did. So yeah, it was helpful.
Yeah, I feel like what it does is it's sort of like, again, growing up in like a Catholic Italian family, same thing. You didn't talk about sex. So so
Right.
what it does is it sort of like takes the veil off or
Mhm.
like takes the mystery out of like what other people are doing or
Yeah.
what that practice is. And then you're just like, oh, it does. It totally normalizes it. And then instead of like looking at that person for what it is that they're, quote unquote, into, you're really
Mhm.
just looking at them as a person, and then you're able to connect with them on, that human level. So
Exactly, yes.
I think that that's really important. And I think it's something like, I'm just thinking like, high school, like health class, like when you're,
Yeah.
right? Like how horrible was that? Where you
Right.
just like, I could just remember like those conversations, and there's nothing healthy about that. And
Right.
I think
By
if
the
we could be
football teacher, or the football coach,
that's
I mean.
right. That's
Yeah.
exactly who it was for
Mhm.
me,
Yep.
And I think, being able to have those conversations just sort of takes the mystery out of everything and just allows you to sort of see, oh, this is what it is. And,
Mhm.
that's
Yeah.
that.
Right.
Alysse, as you're having these experiences, I don't ever want to assume anything. So we talk about, you mentioned you felt gender fluid at this time is what you identified with. Was there you go home for the holidays and it's like, well, I got an announcement to make, or was there, or hey, are you dating anybody, or any of those kind of things?
That experience did not come until later. I was maybe a junior in college when I had my queer theory class, and I didn't come out to my mom until I was like about 23, and that was an accident. I never really planned to come out to my parents because I was still kind of really processing everything myself, but my mom had come to visit me in Chicago, and which she often did. If I told her I had a cold, she would sometimes just pop up 6-hour drive, no problem, So my mom was visiting me, and, moms always know. And she was like, what's wrong? What are you upset about? And I was, at the time I had a crush on this girl, and, that's who I was upset about. And so, my mom said, who are you upset about? And I was like, oh, well, her name is. And without skipping a beat, my mom was like, well, no one hurts my baby. And, she just went right into full mom protection mode. And that was everything I needed in that moment. So I didn't have that fear and anticipation of coming out because I came out by accident. And then my mom just told my dad. And so I never had to come out to either one of them really, because I came out by accident. And so, she was respectful. She knew, I had boyfriends after that experience, and, she would ask, who are you dating? And she would ask questions, but she wouldn't assume gender, which I really appreciated, which, is surprising for someone in her generation and from her cultural background to not be like, I thought growing up, okay, if I don't marry an Italian man, I'm going to be in trouble, and let alone, marrying, a Black trans man, which is what I did, so, but yeah, my parents have been so accepting, and I feel really lucky that they were open-minded enough, to just be like, my dad said, I just want you to be happy. And like, that's all I ever wanted to hear. I just want you to be happy. So
what do you think, Alysse, is the reason why they were so accepting?
So when I was growing up, and if you follow me, I recently shared this experience on my channel, but when I was growing up, we had a close neighbor, and they lived right across the street, and their son went to New York City to go dance in the New York City Ballet, and went to, the American Academy for the Ballet. And when he came back, he came out to his parents as gay, and he was 15 and I was 8. And some of their friends turned their back on them. And my mom was like, no way. Like, we love Jordan. This changes nothing. We stand by his parents, and he's gay, and he's allowed to love who he loves. And I remember at 8, so that was the first experience I had with anyone being gay or coming out, and it was a positive experience. I saw him being loved by his own parents. I saw him being loved by my parents. And so that even though at 8, some people are like, oh, I always knew I was gay. I didn't. Mm-hmm. So for me, that planted the seed, I think, in my subconscious that when I did accidentally accidentally come out to my mom, so many years later, I kind of knew how she would react, even though it was an accident. I knew that she was accepting of Jordan, and I saw that in her in so many years before, and I think that prepared her and modeled behavior for her to how you should react when your child comes out as gay, or LGBTQ.
Yeah. I'm really grateful that your mom was able to be there, because I honestly sometimes forget that my parents also, when people ask, when they meet, that they come out to the fact that they have, they have a son-in-law,
Right.
and that they have lost friends, and but when we see that, how we can all lift each other up as a community, I'm grateful that your mom was able to be there for Jordan's parents. What I want to talk about though also is that you mentioned how you had the support of your parents, but sometimes there's a journey of self-acceptance as well too. Can we talk about what that was like for you a little bit, in any different ways that's been in your life?
Yeah. I mean, if you asked me what my two biggest fears were as a kid, I would say one, losing my luggage, which just always terrified me for some reason, that I was going to lose my things. And the other one was never finding love. And there was just something about me as a person that I didn't feel was lovable. And I don't know, we could dive deep into where that feeling comes from. I was a bigger kid. I was not, developed earlier than everybody else. And so I was so desperate for the love and affection from the kids my age, and I wasn't really getting it. And so as I grew up, I started, I think when, reasonable or childhood reasoning would say, okay, there's something wrong with me, right? I would like these kids to like me and invite me places and maybe, want to take me to a dance. They're not, I'm the problem, And so I kind of had that I'm the problem attitude. And what I saw as easiest, as the path of least resistance to validation and attention, was dating cis men. And I realized that was easier because it was so low risk. It wasn't really what I wanted. The stakes were not so high. So my self-esteem being so low, I was just like, I just want attention, or I want to be there for anyone. I just want someone to love me. I just want someone to love me. And as I went on my self-love journey, I really realized that, I need to love myself first and foremost, and then I will allow love in from the outside. And I don't think if I would have learned to love my body and learned to love all my quirks and my shyness and embrace everything about who I am, I don't think I would have found love, because I had to go on that journey. And I definitely don't think if I wouldn't have gone on that journey, I would have fully come out. I think I would have just sat with that knowledge that, yes, I think my sexuality is fluid, but it's really hard to come out in your late 20s. And start trying to date other genders. It's really hard. It was I remember distinctly switching my Tinder from men to women. And I was like, oh, I'm getting like all these matches to like 2 a week. What? I was getting like 20 in a day when and it feels like, is it me? Is it me? Is it the problem? And you really have to have a solid foundation of self-love for me to really come out. I needed that foundation to be like, no, it's not you. Maybe there's just less women in the area, like use logic, girl. Like, yeah.
Right. And it's interesting with your journey of self-acceptance is that I find that there's a couple different things that I'm hearing in your story. I'm hearing that you got alignment with who you are.
Yes.
And so when we get alignment, then those things come into our, like it's our destiny or whatever your word is to call that identifies, that rings true to your heart. But to the fact that if I have self-acceptance and I'm out there dating and I start to enter the dating pool and I'm not looking for someone to give me that, then it can't be taken away from me. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Hearing, sort of this journey that you've been on, if anyone's listening right now and maybe they're sort of in sort of those early stages of trying to figure out, that self-acceptance path, could you give any like advice or any tips or share with the listeners on how you were able to go on that journey?
Yeah, for me, I started my self-love journey on the outside first. I think the thing that I received the most validation for was my looks. And so it was easiest to start there. And so I, really started by I had a friend, I had moved from Chicago to Atlanta, and I was running Ready to Stare, which I'm sure we'll get into more. And, she told me, she was like, you are your customers. You're selling these amazing products, but no one knows who you are behind the scenes. And also and I was like, who cares? No one cares about me. They want to buy my products that I'm making. And she was like, you are your customer. I challenge you to take one selfie a week. And I was like, no way. I am not going to take any selfies. No one cares about me. But she was like, do it. She held me accountable to it. And that process really changed my life, because I was able to see that I was worthy of being seen. That's what I had to learn, is that I deserve to be in front of the camera. People did want to see me. And at the end of the day, I wanted to see myself. And so that process, that's where I started. And then I had to go inward, and I had to tackle all of those feelings of you're not worthy of love, and you're too emotional. All of those lies that I had told myself for years and years and years about why I wasn't good enough. Then I tackled those, and having that foundation of, you feel good about the way you look, you can feel good about the way that you are and who you are. And so I always go back to, your selfies, they're not selfish. They have a purpose, and many of us, we need them. There's nothing wrong with finding our own beauty. I think that's so important, especially when you exist outside of the beauty norm. You want to be able to look in the mirror and say, I deserve to be seen and feel beautiful just like anyone else. So
and represented as well.
Exactly.
Definitely. You talked about the beauty norm, and that's I
Yes.
think strongly about that. And literally, for those who are listening, who maybe have not met Alysse before, I kind of use this as is the way with social media. Do I feel better, or do I feel worse after looking at someone's, and I walk away from your content, and I just brimming with a smile on my face.
Oh, thank you. That's the goal. That's what I want you to feel. I want you to, Ready to Stare is really all about getting people to think, getting people to feel something. And, it was inspired by, one of my own experiences. If I can go tell that story. Okay. Please. This is important. So I was living in Chicago, and, growing up with my mom having a pretty loud fashion sense, I had a really loud fashion sense, but a really shy personality about it. So I would always dress really loud and out there, but I was like, why are you looking at me? Who cares about me? It really was kind of a mismatch, because my outfit said bold, but my personality said timid. And so I was crossing the Six Corners in Chicago, which is, is a huge intersection. And I had this really short neon orange sweater dress on and bright blue wedges. And I felt so good about this outfit. And for those of you who are listening who don't know what I look like, I am plus size, about a size 20. At the time, I was probably a 16, 18, but I've always been larger bodied. So I was crossing the street in this outfit, and someone rolled down their window and yelled, "Hey, fat girl, stop trying to look skinny." And I just remember that experience so distinctly, because I remember thinking, stop trying to look skinny. Oh, you're saying that because I am plus size that I can't be confident. You're saying that confidence and wearing what you want is reserved for only people who meet the beauty norm. And I was like, that's not true. And I'm going to do something about that. And so I was, 23, 24 years old. And I was like, I'm going to do something. And so I really wanted to start a personal style blog. That was always my dream, but I was at that point way too timid and not comfortable in front of the camera. I had the style, I had the vision, I had the drive, I had the passion, but I didn't have the confidence. So I started a jewelry line instead. And so I started making big, bold earrings and body chains for all sizes. I made these crazy plastic dinosaur earrings. And so I just made really bold things. And I was like, I'm going to change who's allowed to be a part of the conversation. I'm going to make fashion more inclusive. And I used a lot of models of color, and I used models of all genders, wearing earrings, wearing body chains. And this was in 2012 when I started. And it was kind of a big it was a big moment for me to not only have the confidence to do something on my own, but to be like, yeah, I can do this. Like, I can run this business by myself out of my 600 square foot apartment in Chicago with my friend. And I remember her saying, "This apartment is not big enough for your dreams." She was always, sitting in glitter or something, because I had all these wild ideas, and just I felt like I could do anything at that point. So,
what a great! I love that. This apartment is not big enough for your dreams. What a truth, but yet like kind of like to keep you going, push you to keep going at the same time.
Well, she ended up moving with me to Atlanta, and we had a 3-bedroom apartment, and the 3rd bedroom was for my business. So she was such a great friend, in that she was like, "Yeah, well, let's move. Well, let's get you more space," and so she moved with me. So that was really cool.
So you moved down to Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
We know that you're in Cleveland today.
Yes.
How long were you in Atlanta for?
I was only in Atlanta for 14 months. I moved because, I needed more space. Atlanta was my Santa Fe, so to speak. That's always the place where you're trying to get to. It's that, the weather is going to be better. It's going to be calmer. You kind of like idealize a place. And that was me with Atlanta. I remember waiting for the bus in Chicago, and, at that time, there was like a app that you could, I don't remember, but it was really slow. You had to like text it, and it would text you back. And I was like, "Where is this bus? I'm freezing." And so I just wanted to get out of Chicago. I was just tired of 7 years of not having a car and being in the cold and not having room. And I wanted a different life. So we were like, yeah, let's move to Atlanta. It's going to be so much better. At that time, there was a lot of reality shows being filmed there, and there was just so much going on, or so it seemed. And then when we got there, it was so different from Chicago. The community feel that I felt from Chicago, like you would meet someone and they're like, "Oh, I'm a nail artist. You're a jewelry designer. Let's do a photo shoot together. I know this stylist." That was very Chicago. That did not exist in Atlanta. People would be like, "Why would I buy your handmade jewelry when I could get this pair of hoops from China for, $3?" I was like, "Well, mine's handmade." And it was like, I was really having to explain things to people like that. And so I made some good friends, but I just didn't feel like I really fit in there. It was my first time living in the South. It was my first time living outside of the Midwest in general. So I just felt like it wasn't for me. And I had kind of spent all of my savings to move down there, and I wasn't happy. And so my dad was like, "You know what? It's okay to like admit that like this is not for you. But if you want, you can move back to Ohio," which I had said at 18 I was never going to do. I, in fact, told my parents to convert my bedroom into a man cave because I was never coming back. Never. So my dad was like, "You're not happy. There's no reason why you," and we were looking at houses. I remember we were looking at new places to move in Atlanta. And I remember getting in the car, and me and my friend looked at each other, and we just both started crying, and we're like, "I don't want to live in that house." And she's like, "I don't either." And so that conversation with my dad was like, "You can come back. And if you come back, you don't have to work a 9 to 5 because you can live in our house and kind of get on your feet and try for once to run your business, run your business and see what happens and not have to worry about rent." And I was like, "You know what? I never thought at 26 I'd be living in my parents' basement, but I'm going to do it." And so we moved back to the Cleveland area. Like I said, my room had been converted to a man cave. So I lived on a pull-out couch for 6 months until I finally was like, "Okay, my back is killing me. Can we please get a bed for this room?" So we did eventually. But yeah, I lived on a pull-out couch while I had a studio space where I ran my business. And so that the rent that I paid was to have a studio space for Ready to Stare so I could stock supplies and have inventory. And I did that. And it was very humbling, of course, to live with my parents at that age, but it was definitely what I needed. And I have not worked a 9 to 5 since I left Atlanta. Almost. Yes.
That's amazing.
That was 6 years ago.
Wow. I think about when I hear that, like the love that your parents have for you for doing that is it's just that has to be like the biggest gift that they could have given you, because they not only they like recognize that you were unhappy, figured out a way to get you, to be in a happier place. And then to be able to give you the opportunity to say, we love you, we support you, we want you to embrace your dreams. We want you to, take this idea, this concept, this business that you're building. We want you to have the opportunity to create and thrive. I wish that, for many people that could be the story for everyone, where they feel that support or have that support system. And I just think that, like, I just want to meet your mom and dad and give them a hug. That's just how I feel. Because it's just to know that they were able to do that for you. That is just like, I don't know. I think about parents and, parenting and, every now and then, just looking at sort of experiences that we see with other people who have kids. And it's like, that really is the job of parents, is to love their kids and to support them and give them everything that they can to support their dreams, their desires, and their wishes. I mean, obviously, if they're all with, good intention. But I just, I think, hearing that, it's just really great to hear a lesson for all of us, who are an influence in, a child or, a teenager or a young adult's life.
Yeah, I think that my parents' generation was raised very much like, you get your degree, you get, because their parents were, more blue collar workers. Their parents were immigrants. And, my parents were the first ones in their family to get degrees. And so it was very much like, you get a degree, you get a job, and it doesn't matter if it's not your dream job, and you work. And I am a true millennial, and that I hate working a desk job. I feel very confined by work hours. And I worked at Groupon when they were like booming. That was one of the jobs I had out of college. So I know what it's like to work at, it was literally at the time, the fastest growing tech startup in the country. And I worked there at that time. So I knew I had a glimpse of that life, and I knew it wasn't for me. And the same time that I quit Groupon to go to Atlanta, someone else quit to literally ride his bike from the most northern point of Canada to all the way to South America. Like, somebody else quit to like go move to LA and like write scripts. Like, everybody there was like just true, like creatively stifled millennials. That was like who Groupon attracted as people. So I have amazing friends from that time period. But yeah, I mean, I knew I wanted to be in a creative field, and I was kind of like, yeah, I'll live on a pull-out couch rather than working at an ad agency or doing, because I graduated in 2010, and that is when like I had an internship at the Chicago Tribune right after college, actually writing about Boys Town and Wrigleyville. That was my beat. And I had to be paid as an intern because the Tribune was bankrupt. And that's the only reason I was paid. And that was the climate of which I graduated with a journalism degree. So I kind of like always had to be sort of scrappy and figure things out. And that was not easy for my parents to understand. They were like, I don't get it. Like, why can't you just go to an office, get this job? But at the same time, they didn't get it, and they supported it. And then, as I became an influencer, transitioning from designing to blogging and being an influencer, I remember, my parents really didn't get that. But I remember specifically sitting down with my dad and him being like, so have you heard of this girl, Tess Holliday? And I was like, Dad, yeah, Tess Holliday is one of my friends. And he was like, really? And that was like the one moment where I was like, my dad kind of understands what I do.
Yeah.
So that was pretty funny. But yeah, generally, like they haven't always gotten it, but they understand that I'm passionate about it, and that, I'm really determined. And, it's taken a long time. I've never been driven by money. I've always been driven by passion and purpose. And so, yeah, they've always like, even if they didn't understand it, they always kind of like, were like, yeah, let's help you how we can.
Yeah. It's definitely like the evolution of the workforce, right? Like,
exactly.
Like I could think of like, my grandparents to my parents to like where, my generation. And it's, there's just a very distinct difference, but it's also how the corporate world is set up. Back then, like your parents, my parents, like corporate world, you were set up. Like you were able to stay at a job for 30 years and move through around the company.
What's that? Yeah. $20,000. I mean, like nothing. You know what I mean? It was just totally different life.
Yeah, it totally was. And I think that it's important, especially like now that the goals are different now. So it's changing with the times. And I think, again, going back to your parents, like for your dad to like sit and do like a little bit of like, research, right, to find out who Tess is, and then all of a sudden to, say to you, like, do you know who this is? And then it's just having them. I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's so important for all of us, and a reminder for all of us, that you've got to kind of keep moving with the times. And now, especially with, what we've gone through in 2020, to sort of see how we come out of this, I think, we're definitely going to see so much more, remote working and people sort of not necessarily understanding that you don't have to be chained to a desk or an office, that you can go out into the world and experience working life in a different way.
Yeah, that is so true. I remember I had a friend like around this time last year tell me, I don't know how you work from home or how you've been working from home for these past 5 years. I could never do it. Well, guess what? She's been doing it. Know, like you say you could never do it, but you do what you have to do. And a lot of people can, there are things that I liked about working in an office. Obviously the camaraderie is different. And, there are things about it that I obviously didn't like. So I think, it's good to be adjustable and flexible. I think that is one of my true Italian traits. Italian Americans are very controlled, but Italians are very flexible and go with the flow. And that is where I am a true Italian.
I think it's important for sometimes when we see an entrepreneur on television or on social media to know the backstory of the 6 months when you were sleeping on the couch downstairs in the basement. Yeah, like I'm standing on that. I'm standing on the shoulders of my parents, and they're immigrants. That their immigrant parents are, that we all this chain of events. And I just have to call out one more time, like, Ready to Stare. What a great, I love a good title, and I don't think it's any better than that.
Yeah.
So Ready to Stare started off as a jewelry business, right?
Yeah. And it was all inspired, by that experience, walking across the street and me realizing when you are confident in who you are and what you're wearing, people will stare at you. And when they're staring, you have the opportunity to change how they think. And maybe by someone seeing you wearing something bold, they might think, yeah, I could do that too. Or yeah, that plus size person, they can wear that, or that male presenting person can wear a skirt, So it was really all about making, at the time, fashion more inclusive. And my brand has since expanded to include other things beyond fashion. But at first, it really started as, I don't see myself represented in the fashion industry, and I want to change that.
You do this as seen on you section. And can we talk about that a little bit, what that is? So
sure. So one of my favorite things when I was designing, my favorite thing was creating the product from a sketch and then seeing it on someone was my absolute favorite thing. And when I transitioned away from designing into blogging, my aunt was a huge mentor of mine. She's also an amazing businesswoman. She sat me down and she's like, what do you like about designing? And I was like, I like creating and I like seeing it on someone. Step 1 and step 10, step 2 through 9, I could really do without. And she was like, you can get that same like joy from blogging. You can make a recommendation and then see someone wear it. And she's like, I bet that will bring you the same. This is like, again, someone in my parents' generation, like pretty cool that she understood that, like kind of how social media works in that way. And she was like, I bet you can get that same feeling. And so that's where the As Seen on You story, it's a story highlight on my Instagram. So when I wear something or I recommend something and then someone buys it because they saw it on me, I share it. And I think that is really helpful for people to see, not to see how it looks on another person, and for people to see like, yeah, that's actually extremely valuable to me. And it helps me know like what you want to see more of. Like, okay, you liked that sequin dress. I'm going to look for more sequin dresses and the most absolute validating thing is when people tell me like, hey, I just wanted to let you know. And they always say, you probably won't read this. And I'm like, okay, I try to read everything. So yes, I will. You probably won't read this, but because of you, I just remember this one very distinctly. I live in Arizona and it's always over 100 degrees, but I always hated my arms. And so I'd always wear long sleeves. But because of you, this summer, I did this big event and I was on stage and I had a sleeveless shirt on. And I was like, I started crying, and it's like, And then, now since coming out on my platform, I get even more comments that are like, I'm getting married and I just, I want to wear a bikini with my wife, on our honeymoon. And I did it because of you, and like, I don't have, when you're an entrepreneur, a solopreneur, if you will, I don't have employees or anything. My audience, that's my boss. That's my customer. That's my lifeblood. And so I keep a folder of these messages on my phone in an album called The Feels. And I read the feels when I feel like, why am I doing this? Or when I'm getting a lot of hate for something, lots of trolls. Yeah, which I still get, unfortunately. And I'll read the feels because that's why I do this, so As Seen on You is a tribute to, I call them my ready to stereos. It's a tribute to everyone in my community that has maybe stepped out of their box or worn something that they wouldn't have because they're part of this community. So that's absolutely why I do what I do. That is my driving force, is to make people feel good about themselves and do things, and not only wear things, but now travel places they wouldn't have and do things they wouldn't have done. So.
Yeah, it's I find that as my life has progressed, is that I'm really drawn to people that when they figure out a way to maybe get over a hurdle, whether it's self-acceptance, love, fashion, and then the people that really spark that I gravitate to are the ones that then share that with other people, the service that they do, and that's really what this, part of the reason why we wanted to sit down and talk with you is because we so appreciate the service that you do and how well you do it, and just how you have fun in the way you do it as well too. That's a gift.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's taken a long time because I really went on this journey of self-love in front of everyone. I already had a platform. Ready to Stare was already a platform by the time I started, taking those selfies and putting myself, I would design. The first campaign I ever modeled for was a t-shirt, my very first t-shirt campaign. And yeah, I had 1,000 followers at that time. And by the end of the year, I went to 10,000, all by switching my strategy of including myself in the content more. And it wasn't anything fancy at first. It was, when I lived in Atlanta, I had a job I really hated, an office job, and there was an amazing full-length mirror in the bathroom. And so I took a selfie in that mirror one day and I shared it. And I was like, you know what? This is what I'm going to look forward to every day. And so I would dress, I would spend time putting together an outfit I liked, and I would take a picture in that mirror and I'd share it on my Instagram. And that literally those mirror selfies catapulted me from 1K to 10K. And not like numbers or everything, but it showed that there was something that people wanted to see. They wanted to see my outfits, even there wasn't, I think it's so easy for us to compare ourselves like, oh, I don't have the budget that this person has, or the creativity, or the photographer, or the equipment and all. And like, you don't have to have all that. You just really have to be yourself and be comfortable sharing that, whether that means good feedback or bad.
Right. And it's interesting. I'm hearing what you're saying, and this all makes sense right now because Ready to Stare became so much more. It became a plus-size fashion blog. It became about travel. It became about LGBTQ resources. And then it also was like wonderful, beautiful things like you shared your wedding.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was definitely unexpected. I was planning on, I was living in Ohio. When I moved to Ohio from Atlanta, I was like, okay, I'm going to get on my feet. I'm going to move to New York. And that was what I was really planning to do the whole year of 2017. I was going back and forth from Ohio to New York, looking in different neighborhoods. And I was like, this is it. I got to be in New York. If I want to be a top plus size blogger, all the top plus size bloggers are in New York. So this is where I got to be. And then in October of that year, I met my now husband, and I did not go anywhere. And it's not to say that, I think New York was, again, like an idealized version of what I wanted from my life. And meeting my husband, Gio, really made me realize like there's work to be done in Ohio, especially in terms of LGBTQ advocacy. And I had just actually come out publicly on my page in October of 2017. So I came out publicly, and then, started dating this amazing advocate in the community. And so I definitely learned a lot from him. He runs his own nonprofit for trans youth called Meta Center Inc. He's a legal advocacy organizer for a legal nonprofit here in Ohio. So I had such great teacher in terms of learning about LGBTQ issues. And obviously I had an academic background in it already from my gender studies, but meeting Gio showed me a little bit more about some of the lived experiences that you can't learn about in a book, So that was extremely invaluable to me.
I was reading just a little bit on your blog about your wedding. And so part of the reason why that I sort of gravitate to that is because for 14 or 15 years, I've been in the wedding and event, planning
I didn't know
industry.
that.
Yeah. So, and that's, my quote unquote day job.
Okay.
But running that, wedding planning business for so long, and myself being very much an advocate, in 2012, 2013, 2014 for marriage equality, passing. And I was reading your blog, the wedding section, and then like looking through the comments and just seeing like all of the joy that you bring to people that brought, just sharing the photos and sharing the story. I think it's one of those things that I think we don't share. We don't. There's sort of this idea that we have in our head of what a wedding should look like, or what the couple, should look like.
Right.
And I guess over the last, couple of years, I've really sort of taken a look at our company and really looking at like the couples that we work with, looking at the team we have, and really just seeing like the diversity within our own company. And then also the clients that we attract, they're just like, kind of like, how your teacher wrote or drew that line, just sort of like this fluidity. It's like all over the board. And I think it's important for us to all be able to have, the imagery of happiness of people who are, like us, different from us, to see that. And I think that, reading the comments from, your readers, it just really goes to show how we can't not, it's so important for us to share those experiences and those, the images, and to be able to stand up and say, hey, we're all here. And I think over the last, over the last 5 years, we've really seen a lot of progress in what that looks like. And I think it's just exciting to sort of see where we're going to go after this. But I think reading, your blog, it really inspires, I think, in a lot of different ways, on a lot of levels. And I think that there's people like all of us who maybe 6 or 7 years ago didn't even imagine that they would get married one day. And
that
I
was
think
me.
for you,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I know that was me too. I never thought that was even an option. So I just applaud you being able to share your wedding and your story, outwardly, because it really does inspire people to say, hey, yeah, we can. This is what we fought for. This is what we stood up for. And now we're here, and now we can, share that happiness with the person that we love. So,
yeah, I think that, when we got engaged at the Philadelphia Trans Wellness Conference, where Gio was a speaker, and he proposed to me in front of the love sign in Philly. And I knew I wanted a big proposal. I certainly didn't think it would be coming when it did. I was very surprised. And our friends were there, and they took a video, and you can hear people in the video, strangers, saying congratulations, and someone even stopped and was like, hey, I took pictures on my phone, I'll send them to you. And when I shared that on my platform, I mean, the response was wild, and people were just so happy for us. And I do get a lot of, there's no way to quantify identity. That's not something that's asked in any of the demographic surveys on Instagram or anything like that. But I know from hearing from my followers that there are a lot of people who follow me who are maybe identify as queer or bi the way that I do, and are in a relationship with a trans person, and they might feel like that they're not really seen as, they're not represented as much as the community. The dominant imagery that we have of the community is still more cishet thin white guys, and we're starting to see some thin white lesbians, but we don't see couples that look like Gio and I, and I think that's what my audience there are people who have messaged me and, I'm in a relationship like yours, and thank you so much for sharing. And then there's other followers who have been following me since, 2012 and are like, thank you for educating me about LGBTQ issues. And I want to be better and learn more. And so it really runs the gamut. And, it's definitely not easy to put your life out there in something so personal as a wedding. And, there are things I probably wouldn't share about as intimate a details as maybe I did in the process. But overall, I'm so glad that, we were able to share a lot of our experience between, dress shopping. That was extremely emotional as a plus size person, not being able to really, I had a breakdown and I was like, I don't know if I'm really going to find what I really want. I just don't think it exists in my size. And that's like really hard, And so I had those moments and, there's always, we went to a LGBTQ bridal expo and I'm just like, you have to think in your head, are people going to wonder why we're here? And, are people going to look at us and think, oh, you are a cishet couple. Why are you here? So there's all that internalized judgment from the community as well. And so I know that I worry about that. And I wish I didn't have to, but, I just want to send a message to all my queer or bi folks, like you're valid no matter who you're in a relationship with, like your identity is still valid. So those feelings definitely came up planning a wedding, because people want the LGBTQ representation that looks LGBTQ, which is LNG.
But you know what? It's shifting so quickly now. Even we were talking about when you were in Chicago, the neighborhood used to be called Boys Town. And now it's officially changed to North Halstead to be more inclusive.
I love that. I didn't know that. Okay, that's great. Yeah, I used to live in Boys Town and go out in Boys Town. And I mean, even though I was always in male-dominated spaces, there was something about being there that felt comforting, But I was wondering, where does this exist for women like me? And obviously I would go out in Andersonville and some of the other places, but it just never felt the same as Boys Town did. So I'm glad that they're making it more inclusive.
Yeah, and and we talked about earlier about Ready to Stare and how I love a good title. I mean, titles matter, right? So Boys Town. And the thing is that, and I understand, like, and I've had general conversations with friends and people that have specifically with Talk Out Loud, because we have a LGBTQIA, and that was a coming of age for us, where like I have a friend who's intersex, and they told me about why it matters, and I've been, and I'm going to be quite honest, like I've been the guy, a couple of years ago that was like, why do we keep having to add alphabets to it? And what there was maybe a fear that my message was being diluted as a gay man, right? So there was fear there, right? And there's this earth is big enough for all of us.
Exactly.
In the intolerance, I can't speak for anyone else, but I know that as I continue to grow and when I watch out for that fear to trigger that, fear triggers my intolerance, right? So the more that we can have experiences with, you being out there with the person who's getting engaged in front of the sign and witness the love between those two people, obviously there's self-care and self-love where there's some things we keep to ourselves, because unfortunately there's other people that, like ourselves, can sometimes be sick by fear and say things that are hurtful and harmful that control. And so, there's a balance there, right? And we could probably talk about a whole episode about that. But really, to change hearts and minds, I find, is through just real life experiences.
Yes.
And whether that's through social media, whether that's through the work you're doing in Ohio, where I just really, being someone who was born in Ohio, I commend you and appreciate the work that you and your husband are both doing there. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. I remember when our videographer, I'm not sure if you watched our wedding documentary, which is on YouTube, but the videographer that we worked with, he met us when Gio was receiving an award from Equality Ohio as the Advocate of the Year. And he said, I want to tell your story. I don't know if you have a videographer for your wedding, but I want to do a documentary about you because you are going to change hearts and minds. Like, you are going to change hearts and minds just by being who you are. And that's a big reason why we decided to not do a traditional wedding video. Our video includes interviews from like 23 members of our families, all the way from Gio's 5-year-old niece to his 91-year-old great grandmother. So there is so much love around us, and just getting to see how, everybody reacted. It touches a little bit on our journeys as LGBTQ folks, and then also our wedding process. So if there's one thing you watch, I would say that's definitely recommended. I love that video. It's great to watch.
Yeah, we'll definitely include the link to that in the show notes in your episode profile. So anyone who's listening, they can, check that out and see that. I think, just kind of adding to this, conversation, it's so important that we just be ourselves. And I think, like Alysse, you said it earlier, is that, you had to do the work to be comfortable, to feel, to get to know who you are, and then feel sort of comfortable who you are, so that you were able to come out and have these experiences and be this entrepreneur and, strong, female figure, and meet Gio and fall in love and, share that experience. It comes up, I think, often in conversation, sometimes on the show, where we, without that representation, or without getting to know people just on a human level, taking all the labels away and all the other stuff away, not being able to have that, you never get the opportunity to get to know a person. So when you have that space, we all have a broadcast, device in our pockets these days. So being able to be honest and open in who you are, then you're able to start changing, hearts and minds. I just remember, being 19, 20, 21, whatever it was, sort of, coming out, being, in then Boys Town, and seeing transgender women out in the bars and not understanding what that was, because no one talked about, there was no conversation, there was no dialogue around it. And I think now it's like, well, it's just so easy, and it makes sense because there is conversation, there is dialogue, and there's just a real importance, I think, for all of us as a community to, keep having these conversations. And like you said, like having to go to that expo, just feeling like, are you being judged? And why are they looking at you differently? And almost like a sense of, do you have to come out to every vendor that you walk up to that booth? Like, but to get us to a point where we can add as many letters as we have to, after LGBTQIA, whatever it is. And also to not have to feel that way, which obviously is going to take more work. But I think, looking at the movement and looking at the trajectory of how far we've come in such a short amount of time, I'm hopeful that we'll be able to continue, to do that in order to really make everyone in the community feel comfortable and feel welcome, because we are a community, and that's what we're supposed to be doing for, ourselves and for one another.
Yeah. And I think it's important to, really think about, we're a community, but we represent different identities. So it's not, we are united under the fact that, our love is maybe different at this point than still the mainstream norm of heterosexuality. So we're united under that, but yet that is maybe only the one thing we have in common. And so there is more work that is required of us in the LGBTQ community to understand what other people in the community go through. And that isn't just, I identify as queer, so it's important for me to understand what it's like to live as a trans person. Not just that, but the intersectionality. So I identify as a white queer person, so it's important for me to understand what a Black trans woman goes through. I'm a plus size person, so what does someone who's straight size, go through? Or understanding all of someone who has disabilities. What are they? They're identify as queer and they are a wheelchair user. What do they go through in this community? So I think it's really, really important. I think I agree with you, especially going out in Boys Town. It really you didn't see a lot of diverse representation. But I think that was always there. It was just happening in different places, and the conversations were just really divided. And now I think there is a lot more effort to kind of listen, and those who have maybe been more dominant in the conversation are listening more. And that's what we need, is just, we have to do the work. We don't have the lived experience of all of us understanding. Yes, we all maybe have a coming out experience, right? That's maybe something we all share in common, but there's so many layers to our identities that, as a community, we have to listen to each other, work hard at understanding the other identities, so that we're never, I totally understand that. Well, why do we need this letter? Yeah, we hear that all the time, but it's important for us. Like you said, you met someone and that changed. You had a friend and that changed your mind. That's what we need to do. Is we need to be listening and looking outside of the people who look like us and who share our experience. I love a queer meme as much as the rest of you. I love being like, yes, that fits for me. Me and my friend were talking about, getting your chapstick and your headband, and we were, laughing. We love laughing at these shared experiences that we do have with maybe our letter, right, in the community. But I want to understand maybe I don't understand on a personal level, but I still need to know. I need to know what you're going through and what you're experiencing. So I think it's really important. And coming out, you want to find your part of how you fit in the community. So it might not feel as important when you're first coming out to understand what everybody else is going through, but certainly that is something that we all need to be striving for if we really want to be advocates of change, especially because laws affect us differently. So, I remember posting like gay marriage was never the largest issue facing the LGBTQ community, and people did not like that. Because for some people, that was the only right that they didn't have. And I'm like, that was never the only right that we didn't have. We still don't have rights. They just changed it in Ohio. We were the second to last state. So now there's only one where you could not amend your gender marker on your birth certificate. So if you were trans, your birth certificate was never going to match your identity. And that's not okay. So how you can't tell me that is not, like, yes, I understand that marriage comes with a lot of rights, but you need to, that wasn't the first and last victory. There's still so many legal things. And, with the work that my husband does, I hear about it every day. There's some, anti-trans sports bill or, this bill where this person was fired for being trans. And we're here. That is happening every day for as many, the cakes being denied for the gay couple. For as many of those, there's plenty more that are not making the news that are affecting LGBTQ lives. So I think it's really important that we recognize that, like, what affects you personally is not the be all end all of what's affecting the community. So it's really important to get out and understand the issues, because we're part of this community. It's on all of us.
Yep, exactly. And it's what it really is. It's important is if there isn't something that's directly affecting you, but maybe affecting somebody else within the community, that don't turn your back on it. You need to get involved. You need to educate yourself. You need to learn about it. Just even, in the past year in 2020 with, all of the, I don't want to get, too political here, but with, this administration that we had, just all of the, backlash onto the trans community and what that did, and, taking a stand and being public about it. And, just on, I know for myself, it was anytime there was something that was going against the trans community, I made sure that I was sharing it on social media, because I know that the people who I followed, that there are people who supported that administration, and having to show them, like, here, like, this is why this is one of the reasons, many reasons why I disagree with them. But, like, you need to see this, because this is maybe not going to be shared in the mainstream media. So, and then, of course, having those conversations, here on Talk Out Loud, having the conversations with family and friends about, why it's important to support, the movement as a whole. So I totally agree with you. There's just so many different layers, to this. And I think it's just really important to, stay engaged, stay involved, and, like, know that this is where we are. And as much as I think so many of us would like to just be able to sort of like sit back and say, yep, we got all of our rights. That's not really true. And,
No.
if you look at it on a global level, like there's places where we can't travel to because we can be killed for being who we are. So, I mean, that's just like a whole nother conversation. But
so that is, there's still 71 countries, I believe, where it's not legal to be LGBTQ. So that's a big part of, it's a big chunk of the world where you cannot be free to be who you are. And I do get messages. I live in this country and I'm gay and, what can you do? And it's really hard because I don't know what to say as much as just, who you are. Who you are is amazing. And, is there any, and I try to look up, I do this all the time, is I try to look up like local support resources for people and just try to help as much as you can. But it's definitely, it can feel very overwhelming. And you're so right. That can be easy to get stuck in or just our bubble of like, well, it doesn't affect me. Okay. But that doesn't make it not important and not something that we as a community need to care about.
Yeah. Yeah. The word you use is I think you've used and Anthony's used is we. And what we can do is the multiplier effect on that is endless,
Yes, exactly.
So, and what we focus on grows, is at least my personal belief. So that when we get to listen to other people, we get to figure out better ways to solve the problems. So
you don't know listening. What you don't know, and I think I've seen a lot of people, and there's a way to kind of like nudge people. I know there's been things where people have told me, hey, I don't know if you know this, but this, XYZ. I remember there's a influencer that I'm friends with who, I know she's an LGBTQ ally, and she made a post that said women who bleed are powerful or something like that. And I was like, well, hey, love you, but there are people of all genders who bleed and who have periods, and she changed the language, and I appreciated that so much. And sometimes it's just as simple as that, that if that person, whether they're trans or non-binary, who sees that and feels included, that matters. The language that we use really matters, and it can be as easy as sending a DM to someone and being like, hey, I'm not sure if you know this, but this language, I know you didn't do it on purpose, but it's not inclusive. And people, for the most part, they'd listen. And I know for me, I want to know how I can be more inclusive. Right. So I like that social media has really, I think it has done, obviously we've seen, again, not to be political, we've seen how social media can go so wrong and kind of rally people up in the wrong ways, but it can also really unite people and educate people and connect people with people that are like them. If I had not discovered the plus size community, across the world, I don't think I would be here. I didn't have any local plus size friends or anything like that. It was all online. So that changed my life for sure.
Yeah. Well, Alysse, I can honestly say you have changed our lives and made them more of a happy, beautiful place.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I just wanted to say to everyone who's listening, Ready to Stare features everything from style, travel, lifestyle, wonderful resources that Alysse will, help connect you with. I cannot say enough about just how happy we are to have you on the show and be able to share the work that you're doing with some of our listeners. So thank you so much.
So much. This was such an amazing conversation, and I really got to share so much more about my life than I ever usually do. So this is really valuable for me, and I appreciate you creating this platform.
Yeah, we really appreciate you being here today. So thank you so much, Alysse.
Thanks,
Alysse. Alysse's journey is one that's not only inspiring, but one that will make you smile. To learn more about Alysse and the work she's doing, you can visit our website at www.talkoutloudlive.com. Thanks for listening to this episode of Talk Out Loud. If you're enjoying the show, please subscribe, rate us, and share with a friend. You can also follow us on social media at Talk Out Loud Live. If you or someone you know has an inspirational story and a member of the LGBTQIA+ community, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach out to us on our website at www.talkoutloudlive.com. You can also get your official Talk Out Loud gear in our online store. Thanks again for listening, and remember to be true, be you, and to talk out loud.